Today I'm going to show you how to make some awesome looking bowls. But we're not going to use a lathe or any other bowl making tool you normally think of. Instead, I'm going to use a miter saw. And now maybe you're thinking, the miter saw was never designed to make cool little bowls like this. And you're right. So let's make a little jig to make this possible. First off, I have to say that I'm using a sliding miter saw, which makes this process a lot easier. If you don't have a sliding one, well, it makes it a little more limited. Next up, we need to create a base for our jig, and I want it to be the exact width of our saw. It just makes everything easier to put on and take off later. And to do that, I'm going to use some 1/2 inch MDF. Of course, you don't have to use this exact material as long as it is nice and straight and thick enough so that it doesn't flex as you put a little pressure on it. I also want the jig to stretch out almost to the very end of our miter saw. It doesn't have to be exact as long as it's close, because I want the full width here of the saw. Then we're going to use the actual blade to find about center of our board. Each blade in each saw is a little different, so we just want to find about the center, and if it's hard to find, it's always better to come slightly forward than back, because it gives you a little more room to work with. And once you find that exact size, make sure to lock that down so your saw can't slide in and out anymore. Now we need to double check our board and making sure that it is centered. As I mentioned before, it is the exact width of our saw, so it makes it really easy just to use my fingers to make sure everything is lined up. And finally, I'm going to hold down this board and I'm going to use a saw to make a very light cut right here in the center so we know where everything lines up. And as you can see here, the cut is very minor, but allows us to find the center real easy. It's also a good idea to write which side is the back so it doesn't easily get turned around. I moved this over to my workbench because I now need to drill a hole right there in the center. And that hole is going to be for a pivot point. And I'm going to use a little 1/4 inch dowel for that, but you can use a nail or whatever you'd like. Now I can tap in the dowel. We want it to stick up about 1/8 to 1/4 inch. Something like that. Now I'm going to add a little bit of CA glue right here in the groove that we made with the saw. So make sure that the dowel doesn't move or fall out. And by putting it in the groove, the top should still stay nice and smooth. I also put some glue on the back side or the bottom side just to make sure that dowel stays secure. And this glue, it doesn't have to be so perfect. It can be a little bit rough. Moving back over to the miter saw, we need to secure our base in place. And some people just clamp it down. But in my miter saw, it doesn't have the best locations to actually add clamps. So I'm going to try something different. I have an old roll of thin double-sided tape, and I believe if I add a strip here and here, that should keep everything in place. This stuff is also really clear, so I got to make sure I don't stick my finger on it by accident. Then I'm going to secure the base in place, making sure to use my fingers as the alignment, as we mentioned before, right on the edge. So push everything back up against the wall there. Get everything lined up as we're bringing it down, and once it is centered, push down really good on the tape, and it's nice and secure. Next up, we need to choose a good piece of wood. Now there's a couple things to keep in mind. These need to be about 1.5 inches thick, and the wider or longer it is, for example, that right there is about 1.5 inches difference. The wider it is, the deeper your hole or bowl can be. And I almost forgot to mention, this is a 10-inch miter saw. If you have a 12-inch miter saw, then your wood needs to be even wider, otherwise it won't cut as deep. Once you have your wood picked out, it's a good idea to try and look at the grain pattern on the ends and just kind of guess which side would look the best. This has a lot of light colors and this has some dark in it, so I have a feeling this will turn out the best. In fact, here's a piece of that wood that I did previously, and you can see the dark looks really cool coming into the bowl. So this is kind of a guessing game, but try and pick out the best side. Once you know which side is going to be the top and the bottom, flip it over so that the bottom is facing up. And we want to take a ruler and mark from each corner and find the center. So just do it from one side and the other. That way you know roughly where the center is. And once we have that marked, I'm going to use the same drill bit that I used earlier for the dowel to drill a hole that's about 1/4 inch deep. And in case you're just wondering, this is just a drill guide to make sure I get the hole straight up and down. Now I'm just going to test fit and make sure that hole is deep enough. And so sometimes you're going to have to like wiggle it around and it'll slide on. That should be just right. You want to make sure you don't have any wobble or any kind of shaking in this, otherwise the hole might need to be slightly deeper. Also, spin this around a few times because you need to make sure that your wood is not going to interfere with the fence back here. Once I go all the way around, that should be fine. Next up, we need to adjust the depth of the cut. We need to limit it how far it'll go down. My adjustment is right here, but each saw is a little bit different. So I've taken the wood off of the dowel and I'm lowering the blade down because I want to see a couple things. First off, I want to make sure I'm not going to go too low and actually hit that knob or hit the little dowel there, otherwise it'll show a hole in the bottom of our bowl. And then we also want to look at the sides here, making sure we're not going to overcut, because if you cut too far, it just won't look right. Once we get it in place, then we just limit it to that position. And now that we know our blade won't overcut our bowl, we can stick it back on the pin. This next step is going to take a little bit of time and create a ton of mess. So make sure you have your dust collection on and your respirator on, because dust is going to go everywhere. Once we have everything ready, we turn on our blade and make our first cut all the way down to its limit. Bring it back up, turn it about 2 degrees, and repeat the process over and over again. Now let's look a little bit closer at this. You'll notice that some of the cuts are a little deeper. Some of them I have some jagged edges on. We need to go back and clean this up. All we did here was get the rough cut out. So let's go back very carefully with the same blade. We're just going to carefully go around one more time trying to clean everything up. Now that I have a majority of that cleaned up, I'm going to lower the limit on my blade ever so slightly, maybe about 1/4 of a turn. And that way I'm going to bring it back down, get it into place, and then slowly, very slowly start turning this wood while the blade is in contact with it, with the hopes to remove almost all the rest of these marks. And there we go. It's not perfect, but it is definitely a lot smoother. And remember when I said you're going to make a mess? Look, it's all over my miter saw. It's all over the tools behind the saw, all over my wood pile, all over my floor. Yes, you are definitely going to make a mess. Next up is one of my least favorite parts of woodworking, sanding. You're going to have to go in here and hand sand all of this out. You want to make this nice and smooth and pretty. This sanding process is pretty much going to take longer than everything else you've done put together. So just be prepared for that. In the process of making these, I kind of discovered a problem. And that was the hole in the back. I really don't like that. Now, of course, most people won't see it, especially if it's just sitting on a table or a counter. But it bugs me for a couple of reasons. One, it makes me feel like I have to have a super heavy piece of wood because it's really thick, because I have to take in consideration the depth of that hole. Also, what if I accidentally drill that hole just a little too deep? Oh no, now I have a hole right in the middle of my bowl, and all that work I just did is now wasted. So, I had an idea. Instead of drilling a hole in the bottom of our wood, would it be possible to take a sacrificial piece of wood, drill a hole in it, and then take the wood that we want to turn into a bowl and stick it to it with some of that double-sided tape? That way we can just separate it later? Let's give that a shot. Now, something to keep in mind is we need to make sure that the lower board, the piece that's going to have the hole in it, is going to be at least as wide as our widest bowl that we're going to make on it, so we can always keep it in sight and make sure it stays nice and flush with the jig below. I had a little extra MDF, so that's what I'm using. Again, it's about a 1/2 inch. It may be a little on the thick side for this, but we're going to give it a try. It's 8 by 8. See if we can get it on the hole. And that, I believe that'll work well. For this test, I want to use a much thinner board. This is about 3/4 of an inch, and to be honest, I'm not even sure what type of wood this is. I know it's a hardwood, but other than that, it was given to me, so it's scrap. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this square so it's easier to line everything up, and then we'll do this. I lined up the wood as best I could on this MDF, and I made a few corner marks so it's easy to attach everything. Now I'm going to add some tape, and we'll adhere to it. With the tape in place, I'm going to very carefully line this up, and that's probably about as close as I'll get it. We'll press it down. Let's go turn this. I also readjusted the height of the blade so it won't cut too deep. Now please keep in mind that this top piece of wood is only being held in position by some tape. It doesn't have that hole in the bottom to help control its movement, so there is always a chance that this wood could come flying off and hurt you. So if you're going to do this, please be very, very careful. And once you have it all cut out, you'll probably use a chisel to get under here to release that tape. Be careful you don't mess up the wood, and there we go. Now it's time for that sanding. Overall, I really like this option because I don't have to have the hole in the bottom, and I can use much thinner wood. Here, let me show you. There's the other piece and no hole. So this right here is something I'll probably start doing in the future whenever I need to. But please keep in mind, if you do this, it's only tape holding it on. So there's always a chance, if that tape was not put on a clean surface or if the tape is just weak, that this could come flying off and hurt you. But if you're willing to do it and you give it a shot, I think you might like it. Just please be careful. Now, if you have any other ideas or suggestions on how to make this better or even just safer, please put those in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Plus, you'll help everybody else who watches this video. Otherwise, get out in your shop and have fun building.